this is Robert Stearns. Hey, I want to thank you for tuning in. I really believe that learning is one of the greatest joys in life. And one of the greatest ways to learn is simply to have meaningful conversations, both with those who come from a similar background as yours, as well as those whose background might be very different. So my hope is that as we connect and converse with leaders from all around the world, that we will learn and grow together. If you're new with us, hit the subscribe button and we'll deliver the new episodes to you right away. So wherever you are, on a run, in the car, at the kitchen table with some coffee, welcome to the conversation. And good evening, folks. It is Thursday night, and you know what that means. It is time for Bishop and the Rabbi. I am so glad to welcome you here to this Eagles Wings outreach. Eagles Wings is the home of Jerusalem-based Christianity. What was Christianity before Constantine? What was Christianity before the Greco-Romanization of the faith? And how do we mine out from the scriptures what Jesus and Peter and James and John and the early followers of Jesus, how would they have understood their faith? So many of us have faith in Jesus, but we don't know the faith of Jesus. And so what does it mean to delve into the Bible, into the text, to delve into history, to delve into culture? And one way to do that, certainly not the only way, but one way is to have amazing conversations with Jesus' relatives. And Jesus' relatives, of course, are the Jewish people. And so to understand from a Jewish mindset, a Hebraic mindset, their interpretation of the scriptures and their look at things like the feasts and all of these amazing gifts that we have received from the Jewish people. So I'm excited about tonight. People are signing in from all across the country. When you sign in, get us your name. Tell us where you are watching from, the city you're watching from. Let us know if it's your first time. We love to welcome first-time visitors. And do me a favor and hit the share button, okay? And that is the way that we grow this channel. That's the way that we grow this outreach. Some very quick announcements for you. So listen up carefully. March the 12th at 6 p.m., that is coming up soon. We will be at Abundant Life Family Worship Center in New Brunswick, New Jersey. We will have New Jersey Celebrates Israel. That is March the 12th, 6 p.m. at Abundant Life Family Worship Center. You can go to eagleswings.org, go to the events tab, and there's more information there. But join me. Rabbi Matthew Gewirtz will be with us. Mark Gerson will be with us. Consul General Asaf Zamir will be with us. It's going to be a wonderful night celebrating Israel and the Jewish people in a time where anti-Semitism is again rearing its ugly and accursed head. We are lifting our voice and thanking God for the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the light that they have brought to the nations of the world. Then just a few weeks after that, on April the 1st, we will be at Abundant Living Family Church in Rancho Cucamonga, California. That is Rancho Cucamonga, California, April the 1st, Abundant Life Family Church, for what we think is going to be the largest interfaith Seder in history. Somebody call the Guinness Book of World Records. Actually, I want us to do that. Please write that down, Ben. I want us to call the Guinness Book of World Records because I think we should win a record. We've got over 1,000 people coming to this interfaith Seder that will be led by Mark and Rabbi Erica Gerson. It's going to be a wonderful time together. You're going to want to be, and we're going to live stream that. So you're going to be able to tune in on live stream. That's going to be fascinating. So be ready for that. April the 1st at Rancho Cucamonga, California. I want you to join me in Israel September 26th to October 7th for the Watchman on the Wall 2023 tour. We've been taking groups since 1994. Can you imagine? I can't imagine. But September 26th to October 7th, go to watchmantour.com for more information. All right. We are super excited tonight to have a brand new friend with us, first timer on Bishop and the Rabbi. Very honored to make his acquaintance, very honored to have him join us. Many of you who have been to Israel with me, you have journeyed with me to the Galilee, where we have visited a very special place called Domus Galilee. Domus Galilee is the home of the Neo-Catechumenal Way, and that is led by, among other leaders, the seminary there is led by Father Francesco Voltaggio, my dear friend and brother. And it's an incredible center of Catholic spiritual renewal. They are praying for spiritual vitality and life in the Catholic Church. They are believers in the Bible. They have accepted Jesus personally as their Lord and Savior. And they are amazing reformers within the Catholic tradition. And part of their reformation is a firm belief in the Jewish roots of the Christian faith. Well, through Father Voltaggio, I met our special guest tonight, and his name is Rabbi Chaim Eisen. He is the founder and dean of Yeshivat Sharashim, which is a yeshiva in the city of Jerusalem. He's coming to us tonight all the way from Israel. So in a moment, I want you to give him a big welcome. But he has an incredible Bible study called ZionBibleStudies.org. We'll put that in the comments section for you to check it out, ZionBibleStudies.org. He serves as a senior rabbinical lecturer in adult education at the Orthodox Union Jewish World Center, where he has taught for over 36 years. He moved to Israel over 40 years ago as a yeshiva student, fulfilling a dream that he had had since early childhood to live in Israel. And he is devoted to Israel. He's devoted to the Jewish people. He's devoted to Torah, to learning, and he has been gripped in his heart regarding the importance of the Jewish-Christian dialogue and friendship and what that means for our world. I am so honored to welcome, and I want you all to help me, all right? Hit the share button, folks. That's your job tonight. And let's all give a huge Eagles Wings welcome from coast to coast around the world to our new friend, Rabbi Chaim Eisen. Rabbi, are you there?
Thank God. Here with
there
you.
You are, sir.
Shalom from Jerusalem.
Welcome to you. Welcome to you. It's an honor to have you with us tonight.
Shalom to everyone. Shalom to everyone in the audience.
Now, Rabbi, tell us, you were born where?
Well, I can't answer that question without invoking Psalm 87.
Okay.
To Zion it will be said, this one and that one was born in her. That
Amen.
is, I was one of those who was not biologically born in Zion, but I also feel I was born in Zion. And
beautiful.
God brought me home for the first time when I was 18. That was around close to 45 years ago, actually. And when people ask me where I'm from, of course I say I'm from Jerusalem. So the next question is, well, where are you from originally? And I say, originally we're all from Jerusalem.
There you go.
So then they ask me where I grew up. And at some point, you feel the frustration is building. So my response is, okay, I spent the first 18 years of my life in the United States, but then I grew up in Jerusalem.
Very good. And Rabbi, what was it? What was the your family obviously was living in America. So what was the drive? How did you find this kind of impetus, this calling to return home to Israel? What was that? What did that look like for you at age 16, 17, 18?
I can go back even earlier. That is, God put it in my soul. He gave me a soul that always yearned for the land of Israel. I really feel that way. That is, can I share with you a secret that no one else will hear? That
we're on with everybody, but go ahead.
Okay. When I was a youngster in the U.S., I had this subtle distinction that I would always draw. I don't know if anyone ever noticed, but I never referred to my parents' home as home. I referred to it as house because I couldn't bring myself to refer with the word
Wow.
home to any place other than the land of Israel.
My goodness. So
And
this was just deep in your heart.
It was very deep in my heart. People would treat it with some degree of ridicule, since the first time I ever came to Israel was when I was 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you know? You haven't even been there yet. I said, if I love what I see, then of course I want to be here. If I don't love what I see, I'm going to want to change it. But I need to be in the land of Israel. So thank God I am. And all of our children and grandchildren are also here in the land of Israel. Thank God.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, and if you've been to Israel, and again, I hope all of you will join me this September the 26th, you will understand more how the land of Israel speaks to your soul, speaks to your heart, and calls all of us to return home. So, Rabbi, tonight we're going to launch into our Parsha, and we're so excited to have you guide us through it. Folks, we're going to begin tonight in the book of Exodus, chapter 1 of the book of Exodus. We are in the Parsha that is called Shemot. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Rabbi?
Beautiful.
Shemot.
Okay.
And Shemot means names. Okay. You hear Hashem, the name, referring to God, the name of God. Shem is the word for name. And to pluralize a word in Hebrew, we add either the OT or the IM. And so in this case, it's the OT. So Shem, Shemot, names. And we're dealing with, as you see in chapter 1, these are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob. Jacob and his sons are going to Egypt, returning, reconciling with Joseph, who's able to save them from the famine that has struck that whole region. And Exodus begins to recount for us this story. But then there is that cryptic phrase, that really difficult phrase that arises. It says, there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. And all of a sudden there's a new day and there's a season of negativity that's about to befall the Jewish people. And they're about to find themselves as slaves in the land of Egypt. So we're going to go through this today in Shemot. It's an amazing parsha. Rabbi, I remember back in the day, there was the movie with Charlton Heston, the big, huge movie, The 10 Commandments, right? Hollywood doesn't make, I don't know why Hollywood doesn't make biblical movies anymore. It makes no sense because look at the success of The Chosen.
Well,
I mean,
unfortunately, they don't have a Charlton Heston to be Moses anymore.
Well, that's true too. That's true. We could find somebody. But Rabbi, take us into the text. Take us into Shemot today, book of Exodus, chapter 1, and begin to lead us through.
Well, I think the first question that we need to ask ourselves, which is obviously implicit in what you just said, is why is this the beginning of a new book of the Bible? That is, in particular, of course, in referring to Shemot, the names, the opening verse reads, these are the names of the children of Israel coming to Egypt with Jacob. Each man came with his household. We read almost exactly the same thing in Genesis chapter 46. In verse 8, these are the names of the children of Israel coming down to Egypt, Jacob and his sons. So, first of all, why is this a new book of the Bible? Second of all, why the repetition? And, on reflection, that's exactly the point. That is, on the one hand, we're just a continuation of what was, but on the other hand, it's something completely different. That is, in Genesis chapter 46, it was really about Jacob and his family. And that's why the expression was Jacob and his sons, because Jacob's really the main thing. Here, we're speaking about the children of Israel, and they are coming with Jacob, but the focus is on them. The book of Genesis outlines the lives and times of the patriarchs. There's an awful lot we can learn from the patriarchs. And On the one hand, they certainly faced their share of travails. But, with the patriarchs, it was so intimate and ongoing discourse with God that makes facing all travails a whole lot easier. And you get to the next generation, and it's not the patriarchs anymore. Jacob is gone. After just a few verses, his sons are also gone. And you have an emergent nation, and you don't have the same sense of an intimate, ongoing dialogue with God. And as you noted, travails begin galore. A new king who either doesn't know about Joseph or doesn't want to know about Joseph or is ignoring Joseph. And the nation finds itself enslaved, in torment. And for all appearances, God is nowhere to be found. Now, we know that's not the case. We know because we know the end of the story. And we can look back in retrospect and say, it was all straightforward. It was all God being manifest behind the scenes. But when you're living through that bondage, when you're living through that torment, when each of us, I'm not saying this to trivialize anything here, lives through the torments and tempests of our lives, we don't necessarily feel that we're engaging in an ongoing dialogue with God.
Mm-hmm.
So that means Exodus, if anything, is a lot easier for us to relate to than Genesis. Mm-hmm. We can look up in admiration toward the patriarchs, but we can commiserate with the children. And this is the children.
Well, it's interesting because you do see that in the patriarchs, there's that groundbreaking kind of relationship with God. I mean, they're establishing this kind of sense of direct connection, and they're entering into covenants with God, and there's dreams, and there's angels, and there's promises, and there's ladders up to heaven, and there's all of these kinds of things. But now you move forward through the generations, and they're just basically there doing the work. And sometimes, Rabbi, I kind of feel that way regarding certain aspects of Israel that I'll encounter. I think to myself, you think of David Ben-Gurion, you think of the founders of the state, who, by the way, is not so long ago, right? 75 years.
Right.
It's not so long ago. But then you have an Israeli who's born today, right? Or born 5-10 years ago. Well, all they know is the Free State of Israel. All they know, right? They're not coming out of the background of the Shoah, the Holocaust. They're not coming out of the background of having immigrated from Morocco or Tunisia or Argentina or America. They're just Israelis. And so sometimes Israel can seem less miraculous because they're just kind of growing up within it. And this is, of course, the challenge for each and every one of us. When we find places and times in our lives where things are basically, even keel and things are going all right, it's easy in those moments to kind of forget about God, distance ourselves from God. And then, sure enough, something will come on the horizon that's going to bring us back, that's going to refocus us and bring us back and remember that a relationship with God is worth fighting for. And in this case, it is this evil Pharaoh who rises up. And I know, Rabbi, that in response to this, there are some courageous acts that happen in these chapters. So take us through some of what the story tells us and reveals to us about decisions of courage.
Okay, absolutely. Because I think in the first 2 chapters of Exodus, we really do get a sense of profiles in courage. And it starts out, like pretty much everything in life starts out, with the heroic women. That is, you have this Pharaoh who is not only the strongman of the strongest empire on earth at the time. I say not only that, because, hey, he's not even a man. Remember, they viewed
Right.
him as a god.
Right.
And he calls in the midwives and he tells the midwives, when you provide your services as midwife for the Hebrew women, it's in verse 16, you shall see upon the birth stool, if it be a son, then kill him. And yet we could well imagine Pharaoh was definitely not someone who was accustomed to being disobeyed.
Right.
And the next verse we read, but the midwives feared God. Now, that's of course in translation, but it's important for us to appreciate that's capital G in the Hebrew, Ha-Elohim, which is one of the holy names of God. Not lowercase g like Pharaoh. They weren't
Right.
concerned about Pharaoh. They were concerned about God. And they did not, as the king of Egypt commanded them, but kept the male children alive. So the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, calls in the midwives and he calls them to order. Why have you done this thing and have saved the male children alive? You're disobeying orders. And they come up with this excuse. Truth is, I don't know how much anyone, much less Pharaoh, who expects everyone to obey him unswervingly, would be convinced by this line that, well, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They have already given birth by the time the midwife comes to them. The Bible doesn't record Pharaoh's response to them. But we do read in the succeeding verses what happens as a result of this. First of all, in verse 20, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied, they waxed very mighty, and it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, he made them houses. What are these houses? The Bible doesn't tell us. We have an ancient tradition that these houses are the house of the priesthood and the house of royalty, the house of David, that are descended by these two women.
Really?
It's an interesting question as to what their identities are, because, and this is maybe a critical aspect in talking about heroism. The classic Hellenistic model of the hero is the guy who stands up and he makes a name for himself and everyone is enthralled. And these heroines aren't standing up in any public square. In fact, besides Pharaoh, who is undoubtedly incensed with them, we aren't even told that anyone knew what they were doing. And as for these houses, there was certainly no evidence of them at the time. This is all happening in some murky, behind-the-scenes place. But, and this is also part of what heroism means, we have this tradition, when you consider the names of the midwives, Shifra and Pu'ah, they may not be names, they may be titles. Because, inevitably, in biblical Hebrew, you always look at the three-letter root, because every word in biblical Hebrew has a three-letter root.
And these midwives were, just to confirm, these midwives were Hebrews, correct?
Yes, that's explicitly the way they're described.
Yeah.
But without going into all the examples of where we encounter the three-letter root of Shifra, for the Hebrew experts, that's Shin Peresh, which implies to beautify, to make pleasant, to calm, exactly the job description of a midwife. And with Pu'ah, even more so, we see the verb from pu'ah, again, looking at the three-letter root, ef'eh, as referring to a birthing woman crying out. So it could be these are titles. And we have a tradition that these two women are none other than Moses' mother and sister, Yocheved, Jochebed, and Miriam. And since, of course, Moses' mother also gives birth to Aaron, and that's the first of the priests. So she is at the helm of the family that becomes the house of the priesthood. And in our tradition, Miriam marries into the family of Judah and is a progenitor of the house of David. But what's important for us to appreciate is, but they didn't see that at the time.
Right.
In fact, what altogether would they have seen? Well, most obviously, in verse 22, and Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born cast into the river. So for all appearances, not only did they not accomplish anything, if anything, maybe what they accomplished was negative, because Pharaoh was just commanding everyone to kill off the babies. And what makes
right? In other words, it went from bad to worse. They were resistant to Pharaoh's decree, but their resistance led to his anger, which made the situation, in a sense, even worse. But in the midst of that is the miracle of Moses.
Wait, before we get to Moses, though, what I'm going to note is, if we would be utilitarians, and I hope you could hear in my saying utilitarians a kind of undercurrent of a sneer, then we would say, we just judge an action by its consequences, and if the situation got worse, then they were failures. But we're not utilitarians. We're striving to be with God. The determination of what is right and wrong is not what the consequence is going to be, because what the consequence will be is in God's hands, not in our hands. The determination of right and wrong is, are we right by God or wrong by God? Certainly not if we're right by Pharaoh or wrong by Pharaoh. And these midwives weren't concerned with Pharaoh. The sine qua non of who they were is the midwives feared God. That's all that mattered. And there weren't any further questions that needed to be asked. That's it. If you fear God, then that guides you into a certain direction of how you're going to conduct your life. If I can share with you a little story from around close to 30 years ago. I don't know how many of you out there will remember the name Carrie Christensen. He was the member of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee who resigned in protest over awarding the Nobel Peace Prize to arch-terrorist Yasser Arafat.
Really?
And I had the privilege, the night of the award ceremony, to participate in a dinner in his honor here in Jerusalem. And I remember him making the comment with respect to how he could take a stand as he did. And he said it was really all very easy because he had to look at himself in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And he just couldn't look at himself in the mirror if he would have acted differently. To which, of course, inevitably all depend. Sure, once you get to a level in which you couldn't look at yourself in the mirror, if you act in a manner that is against your conscience, then it becomes very easy. It's the real work is getting yourself to a point where you wouldn't be able to look at yourself in the mirror if you wouldn't act as your conscience dictates. Mm-hmm. And that's what these midwives are about. They feared God. And it's the only question that matters. And that's true heroism. And it's not making a name for yourself because, well, in the Bible, especially if Shifra and Puah are just titles, we don't even know their names. And it's not getting up in the public square and making a whole big splash because no one even sees them acting. But they were right by God. And that's biblical heroism. That's the first story of heroism. Shall we move on to the next?
We will, but it's amazing what you're pointing out, that these women were motivated by the fear of God, which the Bible tells us over and over again. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I mean, fearing God, having that acknowledgement of the God of the universe is such a critical and important reality. And it led them to private obedience, even at the risk of offending the king, who of course could have had them, executed. And it's a fascinating story for us today. And I think, appropriately also pushes us to the point of the valuing of human life. They took a stand for life. They valued human life. And they fought for human life. And of course, this is one of the great tenets of Judaism, is the power always to fight for life. Today, we live in a very strange world where technological advances, move us into interesting places of ethical debate. We have to say, okay, in some of these cases, are we prolonging life or are we prolonging death? Because we're able to, in an artificial way now, keep people alive, even when there is no hope of their, coming back to any kind of normal life or quality of life. Nevertheless, there is incumbent upon us this need to always take the side of life, and that is certainly what these courageous women did. All right, so Rabbi is going to take us now. We are in chapter 2 of Exodus, and Rabbi, you have another story of courage from this Parsha Shemot. The names, we're learning about the names of those who came out of, who came with Jacob back, and now Israel is flourishing as a people, but Israel has kind of forgotten God. God is not nearly as active, but he's about to become active, and so they're facing the challenges. Take us to the next story, Rabbi.
And you mentioned names, Shemot, and this story too is a nameless one, even explicitly nameless, glaringly so, because ironically we know what the names are. That is, in the immediate aftermath of Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born cast into the river. So we read at the beginning of chapter 2, and there went a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived, bore a son, and when she could no longer hide the son after 3 months, she took an ark of bulrushes, daubed it with clay and with pitch, and put the child therein, and laid it in the flags by the river's brink. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Now, stop fast. We realize there's something very bizarre about this story. Because in verse 1, it sounded like this man of the house of Levi and the daughter of Levi are just getting married. But they have a baby, and the baby has an older sister. What's going on? And in our tradition, when Pharaoh decreed that every son shall be cast into the river, this man and this woman decided that there was no point in maintaining a family life, because you have a family, you bring children into the world, you're just asking for tragedy, because the child, if he's a boy, is going to be thrown into the river. So they separated. And to appreciate the heroism of saying, nevertheless, we are not giving up. In our tradition, the one who actually instigated the reunion of the man and the woman was none other than the daughter. That she calls her parents to task and brings them back together because if you submit, if you capitulate in this decree of Pharaoh, you're becoming an accomplice with him. And so they have a baby against all odds in what might seem to be the most hopeless of circumstances. And the sister is the one who's responsible for bringing them together. And the sister is the one who oversees this restoration that's going to, of course, culminate in the Redeemer being born here. Now, of course, talk about names. In the story, as we read it here, there are no names at all, which is just so profoundly ironic because we know exactly what the names are. After all, already in Exodus chapter 6, we read the genealogy of the tribe of Levi, and we read that one of the sons of Kehath, who was the son of Levi, was Amram, and Amram took Jochebed, his father's sister, as his wife. That's the mother, and she bore Aaron and Moses. Okay, so there we don't read about the sister, who is Miriam, but we read about her in the Song of the Sea in Exodus chapter 15, and we read in greater detail about the whole family unit in Numbers chapter 26 and in Chronicles 1, chapter 5. So we know the names. Yeah, but in Exodus chapter 2, it's almost glaring. Like, God is telling us through his word in the Bible, it's not about names. Don't define hero as someone who makes a name for himself, because they didn't have any names. And the names don't matter. They're heroes because they side with what's right and not with what's wrong. And you of course are completely on target talking about embracing life, and embracing life is very much the subject here. But I'm going to go back to the description of the midwives as fearing God. Of course, we can describe the difference between monotheism and paganism as, do you fear God or do you fear gods, plural?
Right.
But maybe an even more crucial difference is, if you believe in one God, you believe he's not only the author of the world, you also believe he's the author of a moral code of right and wrong. In the pagan mind, this pantheon of many gods just needed to be bribed by doing whatever it takes, including people and bringing them as human sacrifice.
And the gods were even, at war with each other and playing tricks on each other, etc.
So fearing God, the one God, means there is a universal code of right and wrong that impacts on my life, and I need to be true to it. And that's what's going to define heroism, not making the big splash on the front page of the paper and making a name for myself.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Folks, we're working tonight through Shemot. It's the first few chapters of the book of Exodus. We're spending time with our new friend, Rabbi Chaim Eisen, who is leading us through these, what he's calling profiles in courage. Some of you remember the book by that name that was, of course, of John F. Kennedy, President John F. Kennedy fame. And the scripture gives us these incredible stories of courage that each and every little vignette, each and every little amazing story adds up to the mosaic of the totality of the story that God is telling through history. The arc of God's presence in the midst of his people through history. And, showing us these courageous midwives made a very courageous decision, a private decision. Nobody really knew what was going on, but they knew that God saw what was going on. And so they responded to that moral imperative, that sense of ought that they had in their heart of what ought we to do. And then the parents of Moses, who in chapter 2 were not yet named. Later on, we get their names. But they likewise choose to courageously keep Moses alive, and Miriam plays a key role in that. And Rabbi, we probably have time for just one more story from this Parsha to encourage us. Where would you like to bring us next?
Well, of course, the next story of heroism. And it's the third link in the chain that is indispensable in leading to Moses being able to survive. And that is in chapter 2, verse 5, and the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the river. And she saw the ark and sent her handmaid to fetch it. And she opened it and saw a child, and it was a weeping young boy. And she had pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." And of course, considering Pharaoh's decree at the end of chapter 1, what she was supposed to do was to fling him into the river.
Right.
But she had pity. And she makes it her personal responsibility to ensure that this child survives. And if anything, you could well argue this is the most sublime story of heroism, because this is reaching out to someone who isn't part of her own people and thwarting her own father.
Right.
Because if you're going to take the message of what is right and what is wrong to its natural conclusion, then it doesn't matter who's going to be telling you wrong. And it doesn't matter how inconvenient right is. You do what's right because it's right. You do what's right because you're not taking your marching orders from the God who is dad. You're taking your marching orders from God, who is God. Capital G. The author of not only all that is, but also of right and wrong.
Do the extra biblical sources give us any indication of what was her motivation? I mean, it does see here, it says that she felt sorry, so she had a sense of compassion. Is there anything else that we know of her?
Well, not explicitly. That is, in Chronicles, she is identified according to a tradition that we have, but really, when all is said and done, that's an oral tradition. It's not a biblical tradition per se. And again, I'm going to argue that God's agenda in the Bible here is precisely to cast her as this anonymous person. We don't know anything other than that she was Pharaoh's daughter, who's doing what's right because it's right, because she feels this sense of compassion. And feeling a sense of compassion is, at its root, the very human dimension of God has placed within me, by having created me in the way he did, in his image, endowed with his essence, that moral compass that tells me what's right and what's wrong. And I'm faithful to that. I'm not faithful to the decrees of my own father. Another message, again, of heroism, not making the big splash, because, again, how many people know about this?
Right.
And it's a quiet act of principled opposition to evil. Because, as the great historian Edmund Burke expressed it, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And this is a story of good men doing something. Doing something, being faithful to God.
And I think of what's happening right now, for example, in Iran, as these young women are seeking to express themselves freely and to not be ruled over by religious police, as it were. And, these courageous acts, many of them paying with their lives. You have this totalitarian regime just killing people left and right over there. There is this thing of, I love what you said, principled acts of courage, principled acts of bravery that make an extraordinary difference. And so each and every one of us are called to fear God, and in fearing God, deny the other influences and powers that would push us into whatever other place of acquiescence to cultural mores around us, and say, no, right is right, and I'm not trying to get a big public name for myself here, but this is how I'm going to act. And when we do, we become a part of this unbroken chain that resulted in Moses. And that all those little acts resulted in Moses coming forth. And of course, Moses ultimately led the children of Israel through to freedom. Rabbi, it's amazing. It's incredible. Take a 2 or 3 minutes and tie this all together for us here at the end.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave this as something a little bit dangling, as call it cliffhanger, or
sure,
room for additional thought. You're right that all these three stories culminate in the historical progression in the birth of Moses, the Redeemer. And how do we see Moses? In the second chapter of Exodus, 3 acts of heroism. I think there's a correspondence between the 3 acts of heroism that led to Moses being born and the 3 acts of heroism that are described with respect to Moses in chapter 2. And what I just like to emphasize as food for thought, but not just food for thought, really something for us to internalize in ourselves. The third and most decisive act of heroism of Moses is when he's sitting at the well and he sees these gals, the daughters of Jethro, bring their sheep to the well, and they get chased away by the shepherds. Now, remember what Moses is doing at that well in Midian. What he's doing, in short, is running for his life. Why?
Right.
Because of the previous 2 acts of heroism where he stuck his nose in where maybe he shouldn't have, and maybe stuck his neck out and got himself in big trouble. So you'd think he's already become a fugitive. Maybe he should have learned his lesson. Low profile, keep undercover, don't make a big deal about anything. And what does he do? He sticks his neck out and goes to battle against all the shepherds in order to save these gals.
Right.
Crazy. Not crazy. He can't stop himself. Because what makes a leader is, in the face of injustice, I cannot be silent. And that's also part of what heroism means. So all these acts of heroism really are, I can't be silent. I have to speak up. I have to act, not just speak. And when Moses comes to that realization that he's the one who needs to act alone, then we have to seek a template for who he's emulating. Undoubtedly, unbeknown to him at the time, just consider that when God, in the end of the world that as it is now, is going to bring about that final redemption, we read in Isaiah chapter 59, and he saw there was no man and was astonished that there was no intercessor.
Right.
Likewise, in Isaiah chapter 63, there was no man with me. And I looked and there was none to help, and I beheld in astonishment and there was none to uphold. Kind of like Moses looking this way and that to see if there was any man. There was no one there. He had to do what was right because it was right.
Right.
And that's a challenge for each and every one of us. To do what's right for one reason and one reason only, because it's right. Not because of what something we accomplish, not because of what we're going to get out of it, not because of what anyone is going to get out of it. Even if for all appearances, after the midwives, things got worse, doesn't matter. You've made yourself into part of an extraordinary chain of being that resonates with God's right in the world. And that's the only thing that matters. Heroism, true heroism.
Beautifully and powerfully said, Rabbi. Thank you so much for this incredible reminder to our souls to choose right under the fear of the Lord. We're glad that you've joined us tonight, and we're grateful, everyone, for you dropping by. If you have not had a chance to yet, please take a moment and hit the share button. That makes a huge difference when you share the word and you get it out there. And I want to encourage you, remember tomorrow night, Friday night, we get together at 6 p.m. To welcome Shabbat together. So tune in at 6 p.m. and we'll have the Shabbat blessings and welcome those together at 6 p.m. tomorrow. And Rabbi, we are so blessed to have you with us. We're grateful really for the work that God has done in your own heart and life that has opened you to a sense of dialogue with the Christian community. We're so grateful that you've taken your time tonight to share with us.
If I can reciprocate the blessing, God bless you, Bishop Robert, because this has been such a blessing for me. First of all, that I feel we've established, just like practically overnight, such an intimate friendship. I feel such a resonance with you, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share in the Word of God together here. God bless you. God bless you all for joining.
So, Rabbi, it's your first time with us. So as a first-time guest this week in the mail to you, we will be sending the official Bishop and the Rabbi mug. It's on its way to you. There's about 70. Rabbi Adlerstein has one. So there's about 70 rabbis around the world who have our official Bishop and the Rabbi mug. We'll get that in the mail to you. And we look forward to studying again with you, please God. And may we continue to see the blessing of the Lord rebuilding Jerusalem in our day.
Amen.
Amen.
Shalom from Jerusalem.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Remember, keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.